Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1027 for October 22nd, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
Bardstown in many ways set off a wave of other competitors and other customers that looked at that model and said, you know, we can do this too, whether it's Green River, whether it's Wilderness Trail, there's a number of Castle and Key. And there were a number of players that got in that market. I consider that sort of the first wave of the contract market.
This week we're going to dive into the world of contract distilling, where a brand owner essentially hires a distillery to make its whiskey. David Mandell is one of the co-founders of Bardstown Bourbon Company, and he's now teamed up with other Bardstown Bourbon veterans to build the new Whiskey House Distillery in Kentucky. It won't have brands of its own, but will focus exclusively on distilling for clients. That's just ahead on WhiskyCast In-Depth, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
How about a really great 12-year-old Scotch whiskey? I have a stellar recommendation coming up for you in just a minute. Spoiler alert, it's Dewar's 12-year-old.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Irish Distillers opened its brand new Midleton Distillery experience on September 30th. As of now, it's closed indefinitely after the town of Midleton was hit by flooding Wednesday when the Owennakura River burst through its banks. The distillery itself was shut down for about 24 hours while safety checks were conducted and is now getting back to normal operations. It sits on a hill above the old Midleton Distillery and the Visitors Center. There are no reports of injuries from the flooding. Meanwhile, Ireland is getting another distillery. Amber Beverage Group announced plans Friday to invest €35 million to build a new Walsh whiskey distillery in County Carlow. The site is a historic former maltings that once housed a brewery in the 19th century. Walsh whiskey founder Bernard Walsh says the new distillery is needed to ensure the long-term future of the company's two brands, Writer's Tears and The Irishman.
We need to lay down whiskey stocks for the next 10, 20 years and so on. Because I suppose when you think of Amber Beverage, they're a global firm. They bought Walsh whiskey, and we were, a family business with reach maybe into 50 countries, but we were stretched at that. These guys are across the globe. The demand for Writer's Tears and The Irishman in those markets, we will not be able to meet in the next 10 and 20 years. We need to address that, and the only way to do it with surety is building our own distillery and being in control of that. It doesn't take away from our long-term partnerships and supply that we get already, and that will continue, and nothing changes there. But for new expressions and all the wonderful things that we want to do, we just need to have that independence, I guess.
The project must still receive planning approval from Carlow officials. Construction is expected to begin next year and take about 18 months to complete. Turning to politics now, time is running out to avoid a return to European Union and UK tariffs on bourbons and other American whiskies January 1st. The EU's internal deadline is the end of this month. Talks aimed at ending a stalemate on steel and aluminum export tariffs are still going on. When the European tariffs were in place between June of 2018 and June of 2021, they decimated U.S. whiskey exports to Europe, with exports falling by more than 50% during the period. Spirits industry leaders met in Washington this week to prod Biden administration officials to make a deal in time to avoid the return of tariffs. In the UK, they're still absorbing the excise tax increase on distilled spirits that took effect in August. That 10.1% tax hike was the largest in 40 years. Scotch Whisky Association leaders are hoping for a freeze or a cut in that tax when Chancellor Jeremy Hunt delivers the autumn budget statement to Parliament next month. Scotch Whisky Association CEO Mark Kent is urging British voters to contact their members of Parliament to lobby against any further tax increases.
We've just shouldered the largest duty increase in 40 years in terms of duty on Scotch, which is now something approaching 75% of a bottle of Scotch. The price that you pay in the UK goes on tax. And we think this doesn't make economic sense in terms of the economy. It leads to inflation, and it means less investment. Doesn't make sense for consumers who are having to pay even more in terms of when they want to go out to have a quality drink, and it's not helpful for overall our industry.
Kent says the tax hike discriminates unfairly against spirits compared to beer or cider. The SWA has started a #SupportScotch campaign online seeking fair tax treatment for spirits. In other news, Speyside's newest distillery has started laying down stocks of whiskey for the future. The Dunfale Distillery in Murrayshire made its first spirit run October 6th and is producing both peated and unpeated malts using direct-fired stills. The distillery also features the first distillery malting floor constructed in Speyside in more than a century. Lots of new whiskeys to talk about this week. Glenmorangie is out with A Tale of Tokyo. It's finished in Mizunara oak casks from Japan, and it's priced around £75 a bottle. No word yet on U.S. pricing. Meanwhile, Glenmorangie's cousins at Ardbeg are releasing a new version of Smoke Trails, the Ardbeg Travel Retail exclusive. It features malt matured in Côte Rôtie red wine casks from France. It's in UK airports now and will be available elsewhere in Europe in the coming weeks, along with a few bottles that will be available at the Ardbeg Distillery Visitors Center on Islay. Just down the road on Islay, the folks at Lafroig have unveiled a new series of whiskies. Elements 1.0 uses 100% Islay malt and distilled it with a combination of cloudy and semi-cloudy wort and both 8.5 and 11-ton mashes to capture past and present production methods. It's bottled at 58.6% ABV. There's no word on pricing. I mentioned last week that the Glenrothes plans to focus on its 18 and 25-year-old single malts going forward, and there's an all-new 25-year-old hitting the market. It comes from a high proportion of first-fill sherry-seasoned casks with a mixture of American and European oak, and will retail for around $750 a bottle. I received a sample this week. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Turning now to Kentucky, Brown-Forman has unveiled this year's King of Kentucky bourbon. It's a 16-year-old bourbon with all of the whiskey coming from a single production date of July 19, 2007. 51 barrels were bottled as single-barrel, barrel-strength whiskeys, with around 3,800 bottles available in Kentucky and a handful of other states. I'll have my tasting notes for this one available later in the show, too. Brown-Forman has also released this fall's Masters Collection release from Woodford Reserve. The Sonoma Triple Finish is finished in a combination of Sonoma County Pinot Noir, brandy, and ex-bourbon barrels that had been used for aging red wine. It'll be available at select retailers globally with a recommended retail price of $149.99 a bottle. Now, it may come as a shock to some people, but Bardstown Bourbon Company was named Worldwide Whiskey Producer of the Year Thursday night at the International Wine and Spirits Competition's annual awards in London. The Glen Turret was named Scotch Whisky Producer of the Year, and rum guru Ian Burrell was named the 2024 Spirits Communicator of the Year. Finally, if you've ever wanted to own your own distillery, New York State's Copper Sea Distilling is up for sale. Owner Michael Kinstlick told me in an email that he's ready to move on after 12 years and that he hopes to put the distillery in the hands of those who will take it forward another 12 years and beyond. The $3.5 million asking price includes a 75-acre farm at the distillery near New Paltz in the Hudson Valley, along with existing stockpiles of whiskey and distribution agreements. Contact him through the Copper Sea website if you're interested. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now to check the calendar and look at upcoming whiskey events going on around the world. Tickets are still available for the Whiskey Exchange's Sherry Cask Exclusives tasting Thursday night in London, along with the Kentucky Derby Museum's Bourbon and Bridals dinner with Jackie Zykan of Hidden Barn Whiskey that same night. Whiskey Fest San Francisco is this coming Friday night, and the weekend brings us Whiskey Live in Manila and the Dornoch Whiskey Festival in Scotland. Whiskey Live South Africa is November 1st through the 3rd in Johannesburg. Whiskey Live Beirut is the 8th through the 10th in Lebanon. And the Big Bourbon Night is coming up November 10th in Lexington, Kentucky. Finally, tickets are available for the annual New Brunswick Spirits Festival in Fredericton, New Brunswick, November 14th through the 18th. I'll be there, and I hope to see some of you there, too. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it, and we'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Contract distilling gets a bad rap from critics, but it's the lifeline behind many of our favorite whiskey brands, and most of the bourbon industry's largest players have also done contract distilling with their excess capacity at one time or another. That's largely dried up now as the big distillers need all the whiskey they can produce to meet demand, and a number of smaller distilleries have cropped up to fill the void. For instance, Castle and Key Distillery has done contract distilling since it opened, and the Call family's Western Kentucky Distilling Company was built to do contract work exclusively. Bardstown Bourbon Company is known for its contract work alongside its own brands, and as I noted a few minutes ago, won the IWSC Award for Worldwide Whiskey Producer of the Year this week. David Mandell was one of the co-founders of Bardstown Bourbon Company and has since moved on to start a contract distilling venture with other BBC veterans. Whiskey House is under construction in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, with plans to open next July, and unlike Bardstown Bourbon, will not have brands of its own. I spent some time on a Zoom call this week with David Mandell. So the contract distilling market is fascinating just because of its growth over the last 5 to 7 years. And what you did at Bardstown Bourbon Company is just part of that. Tell me about the market for contract distilling and why you think a $350 million distillery makes sense right now.
Well, Mark, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's great. It's great to be with you. The market for contract distilling is a very interesting market, and it has evolved very much so over the last decade. When we started the collaborative distilling program at Bardstown, we really saw this need in the market at the time for brands that were losing contracts with other large distilleries because they needed to keep their capacity for themselves. They were working their way out of that business. And when you had those contracts too, you didn't have the ability to necessarily say where the product came from. There were restrictions on it. There were issues with what you're making, customer service, and all of those things. And we saw this incredible market, for this, and we built it at Bardstown, and it was a tremendous accomplishment. And I think Bardstown, in many ways, set off a wave of other competitors and other customers that looked at that model and said, we can do this too, whether it's Green River, whether it's Wilderness Trail. There's a number of Castle and Key. And there were a number of players that got in that market. And I consider that sort of the first wave of the contract market. But then as it evolved and more competitors came into the market, but there was also the growth of the industry, and that growth took place again, certainly in 2018, 2019, and then into COVID. But you also have an interesting dynamic that's taking place. And so you have constrained capacity now. So you have a lot of growth, a lot of demand for new fill, but you have constrained capacity. You have Wilderness Trail sold to Campari. They ended their contract program, had a merger with Green River and Bardstown. And so you have capacity in many ways shrinking while you have demand increasing. And on top of that, you have the investor barrel that has come in. And I'm talking about the pure investor barrel, where you have institutional dollars buying tens of millions of dollars worth of capacity. So that's taken more capacity. It's driven pricing up. And then if you're a brand, one of the challenges for you is, how do I guarantee long-term supply, a partner that I'm not going to be afraid of losing my contract if they sell, and a facility where if they're making contract and they're also producing their own brand, there's inherently a conflict of interest there in many ways, because is the attention for you? Is it for our own brands? Are you doing this until you create your own brands or you sell? So it was in that framework that the concept for Whiskey House developed, because we solve a very important problem in the market today.
Let's explain the difference between contract distilling and the, for lack of a better term, the MGP model, where people are buying barrels and then reselling them or creating their own brands from those barrels.
Yeah, there are a couple of different aspects to it. I happen to look at it, differently in some respects. One could look at contract distilling just as sort of your standard mash bills. You produce it, you kick it out. I also think there is a difference there in complete custom whiskey production. We'll talk about that because there are differences to it. But you have that model where essentially you'll produce multiple different mash bills, we'll call that contract. And then MGP, the MGP model has historically been, we'll produce 3 mash bills, we'll do new fill, we'll age it, and we will sell that into the marketplace. But, certainly there's flexibility there. MGP does more than just that, but that's traditionally been kind of the two different models.
How has the market grown for contract distilling, and how has it contracted in terms of supply?
Yeah, well, there are a number of things. One, it has grown just in terms of the overall demand and growth in whiskey. So it's kind of whiskey has grown and bourbon has grown, so has the contract market, because you have more brands that are developed. You have demand from whether it is overseas and international business. You have demand for needed excess capacity from larger companies. So there are many factors to that growth, but the other real driver in the growth has been what I would call the investor barrel. And the pure investor barrel is, again, this institutional where you're purchasing whiskey, and then you are holding it as an alternate asset, and you're expecting to sell it back into the market with no defined pathway to the brand. And so that has driven a lot of growth and capacity. I will tell you, at Whiskey House, we're not doing that business. We are focused on brands and long-term contracts to work with brands to create custom whiskey. And I can explain the difference there between what I would call contract and custom.
Go ahead.
So I think when you think of contract distilling, I think you think of, really more of, we're going to produce certain kind of standard mash bills. Maybe we do a little bit more work there, but there's a big difference between that and when I think of truly custom. For us at Whiskey House, that is working with our exclusive brand partners to design and develop liquid to not only exacting specifications, but we're talking about pushing all aspects of innovation. We're talking about looking at all the different components that affect flavor profile and designing the liquid with our brand partners. And so that's a very different approach. It involves a very significant layer of customer service. It involves, the type of team that you have assembled and the way they think. It also involves a facility that is designed solely just for that purpose. And Whiskey House is and will be the only facility out there that is designed from scratch solely for the purpose of doing complete custom flexible whiskey production. Because we designed Bardstown. I know what we built. It's a wonderful facility, but there are challenges in terms of becoming the most efficient. So if you start with the idea of we want to make the most efficient, flexible facility, you design that facility differently than you might have, in other instances.
What lessons did you learn at Bardstown Bourbon?
Well, I'll tell you, we learned a tremendous amount. First of all, we created and built this whole concept in the program. And so we understood what customers wanted, needed. We also learned a tremendous amount about technology, about efficiency, about what's needed. And some of those things I didn't get, and we didn't get the opportunity, to finish out. And I departed, sold the company sold, but we had the opportunity. And there are very few times in your life you actually get the opportunity to do something again, taking everything that you learned. And a lot of those lessons come from not only from the operation side. They start with kind of design, layout, operations, customer service, what the customers want, how can you deliver, better results, and how do you solve very specific problems. And I'll tell you, the team that we have together, it's the original team from Bardstown, John Hargrove, Dan Lind, but we also, and Roger Henley, we have a number of other folks. We have an incredible team that John runs and manages in terms of developing, the process and the technical side of the distillery. And it's one of the things that I'm most excited about with Whiskey House.
You're building a massive distillery to start out with, and then planning to double capacity by 2027. Is there a possibility that you're growing too fast? Or is that one of the lessons you learned with Bardstown Bourbon, where construction really has never stopped?
Construction has never stopped. And I would tell you, we're not growing too fast. This is the growth that we have planned aligns with the customers and the demands for in the facility. And so, growing too fast is always something you have to be very careful about. What we've done with Whiskey House is we have really thought through everything that is needed as you think 10 years down the road in the beginning phases. So you don't necessarily put everything in day one, but you design the facility and you make it so that you can upgrade and you can add without stopping, or just, at traditional, your regularly scheduled maintenance times. But we're also layering in, when you get to start from beginning on the technology side, that's where it's really exciting. It's very hard to go back because the technical debt in the facility. But when you start fresh and you make sure you have the sensors and the systems from one end of the facility all the way out to the warehouses, all talking to each other up and down, the data that you can pull, what you can do with that data, is really interesting, and it's exciting. And even more than that, the infrastructure we have, I think, is most important. That's certainly a lesson that I learned at Bardstown. Our property and the infrastructure of the property that we have is going to facilitate and allow this type of growth.
Tell me how you're going to use AI in bourbon distilling, because it hasn't been done until now. Yeah,
it's interesting. And I think on a high level, you're really kind of talking about two components. What AI does is it puts together correlations, right? It looks for things and trends so that you can begin to kind of understand issues, problems, and you can look for, solutions. And so the first step is collecting the data. And so for our customers in our program, they're going to have access to data from beginning to end, from the grain all the way through the wood, through every aspect of production, all the way out to some of the interesting things we're doing with our partners in the warehouses. And so having that data, what does that do? It gives you, as a customer, a tremendous amount of information that, one, makes it so that you can operate your business better, but two, you can know everything about every aspect of your whiskey. So once you've collected the data, then that's where AI becomes interesting, because you can then start looking at, how do you improve your efficiency? How do you improve your processes? How do you take all of the different variables, for example, and say, we have this type of corn with this data set in fermentation with this type of yeast and this type of enzyme package that has a performance range within so many degrees. And now you can start dialing in and saying, you know what? Now we know exactly what the enzyme package specification needs to be at the temperature in the fermenter to make it, work the best. So you get the best yield. So you start actually being able to look at things like that. You also start being able to look at, why was this particular barrel, batch, distillate better than this one? Because like right now, honestly, in the distilling industry, we don't really know. We don't know, we don't really know. So you can actually start figuring some of that out. And I think what we're doing is we're taking distilling from where it is to kind of where advanced food manufacturing has been, let's say, for the last 10 to 15 years. So if you go to PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, Quaker Oats, any of those, what I'm talking about here is not, they've been doing it. It hasn't really been done to this level in distilling. And Whiskey House is the perfect place to do it because the customer set is very interested in this kind of information. Not that the big guys and the heritage distilleries aren't. It's just, it gives us an opportunity to really kind of push the boundaries. And I see it as, also being able to bring some thought leadership into, as well with us into the industry.
Let's go through the timeline. You're hoping to open up next July, right?
That's right.
What still has to be done?
Well, we are absolutely on schedule for that opening. But as you could see in the pictures, we had a groundbreaking that wasn't really groundbreaking because the building was right behind us. And we had a ribbon cutting. It's not really a ribbon cutting yet. So it was one of those fun moments. It was, our celebration in terms of announcing the facility. But we are well underway. And we are very excited about what's coming. We do not see any issues in terms of line of sight to start of operations.
Do you already have clients lined up?
Oh, we do, yes. Absolutely. And I'll tell you, I think, one of the things that really excites me when I look at it and I sort of look at the future, I see, Whiskey House as something that really helps and will help the health of the industry. And we very much look at the business this way. Not only me personally am I very active, not only in the Bardstown community, in the Bourbon Festival, was very active in the KDA and look forward to becoming even more active in the KDA once we become members again. But we care a lot about the health of the industry. And I see Whiskey House as being able to serve an important role and niche in the business that helps the overall health of the industry, really also by focusing on brands and being that partner to, brands internationally, large companies, to be able to help and assist, whether it's innovation, whether it's, new liquid development in that same vein, excess capacity. There are a lot of ways that we can do that. But with no brands of our own and not focusing on hospitality and not having to run, a visitor center and those components day in and day out at the site, it allows us to be hyper-focused.
That's what I was just about to ask about. You're not going to have any brands of your own.
That's correct.
Why not?
Well, again, I think it goes back to, Mark, it goes back to kind of this fundamental, I think, disconnect in some ways that exists in facilities that are doing contract production and have brands of their own. And the challenge is, again, as a customer, where do you sit? Are you there because or until, their capacity fills up for their own brands or they sell? Where is the focus? And so for us, we really love this part of the business. Not that we didn't love the brand business. I loved building and creating all of Bardstown Bourbon Company's brands. That was one of the things that I loved doing there. Whether it was Fusion, Discovery, every collaborative series, component that we did together, that was fun. But we take all that knowledge, and now we can work with our customers to kind of lean in and help them develop those types of products. So we don't have to do it for ourselves. We're assisting them in their development, and it starts with the beginning, the whiskey. And there's no push or pull. They know when they're with us, we're solely focused on them, and we're not running sales team, hospitality, restaurant, all the other components that come along with, the businesses when they're split like that.
David Mandell is the CEO of Whiskey House, which is currently under construction in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and will open next July. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the latest release in Bardstown Bourbon Company's collaborative series with Carter Cellars. They took a blend of 17 and 12-year-old bourbons and a 6-year-old Indiana rye and finished it for 14 months in Carter Cellars Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon wine casks. It's bottled at 54.15% ABV. The nose has touches of dried flowers, cinnamon bark, leather, and a hint of pecan wood. The taste has notes of plums and raisins, pecans, buttercream frosting, and oak tannins. The finish is long and dry with toasted oak. I'm scoring the Bardstown Bourbon Company Collaborative Series Carter Cellars Edition a 92. Next up, the 8th release of Midleton Distillery's Garyana American Single Malt. It's matured in a combination of virgin Garyana oak, PX sherry, Washington State red wine, and ex-bourbon casks. It's a 4-year-old whiskey bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has touches of plums, apricots, anise, cooked fruits, and honey. The taste has notes of cooked fruits, plums, almond oil, and baking chocolate, and the finish is long with a subtle hint of spice. I'm scoring the 2023 release of Westland's Garyana Single Malt a 93. Now let's look at the King of Kentucky Bourbon 2023 release. My sample was bottled at 62.9% ABV. It will vary from barrel to barrel. The nose has touches of tobacco, leather, charred oak, dark chocolate, coconut, vanilla, and dark fruits. The taste is dry and astringent with oak tannins, dark chocolate, black tea, and just a hint of coconut. The finish is long with touches of coconut, dark chocolate, and oak tannins. I'm scoring the 2023 release of King of Kentucky Bourbon a 91. And let's wrap up with the new Glenrothes 25-year-old single malt. This one is bottled at 43% ABV. The nose has touches of marzipan and roasted nuts, along with peaches, orange peel, hints of coriander and jasmine, and a touch of chocolate. The taste is creamy and smooth with vanilla, peaches, orange peel, hints of roasted almonds and chocolate candy, and subtle spices. The finish is long and sweet with touches of sandalwood and almond oil, and I'm scoring the new Glenrothes 25-year-old a 95. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,500 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Gabriel here. The new Dewar's 12-year-old has been completely remastered to be richer, smoother, and more balanced. It's a total winner. It's double-aged in first-fill premium bourbon casks for greater depth and breadth of flavor, with notes of apples, lemon zest, and spicy and floral notes with a long, smooth vanilla finish. The experts agree too. It's winning awards like pros sink putts. In fact, WhiskyCast's own Mark Gillespie gave it a 94-point rating, which is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old Scotch. It's also earned a 94-point rating from Whiskey Advocate. That makes it their highest-rated 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. It's an excellent testament to the skill, craft, and refinement of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. Drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. Leon of the Malt Mariners posted this in the app from Germany the other day. A question for our American friends. Is there a quick and easy way to determine an average current price for a whiskey bottling in the U.S., like one or two benchmark online shops to get a feel for a price level, like, for example, the Whiskey Exchange and Master of Malt in the U.K.? As I understand, the system in the U.S. is quite different to Europe. I'm thinking about doing an English-speaking whiskey channel and would therefore need to check up on prices in different countries regularly. Any ideas? Well, the system in the U.S. is very different from Europe in that each state is its own market in terms of taxes and pricing. I suggested Leon use Total Wine & More as a benchmark since it's the only major nationwide chain store, but several folks pointed out some problems with that. Rafa Nava provided this excellent answer. In my experience, you should try to check in a few controlled and non-controlled states. That will give you a reasonable band of prices for a particular subset. As Mark was saying, Total Wine & More will be the best overall, as they are in a large number of markets, but it does vary from state to state. I suggest one or two methods. Check major national and regional chains like Total Wine, Julio's in Boston, Bevmo in parts of the West Coast, 21st Amendment, Specs in Texas, Binny's in Illinois, and ABC in Florida, for example, and also check winesearcher.com. They provide pricing and availability for spirits, including a list of retailers and their prices. I've used it many times, and it's pretty accurate for bellwether brands and origins. And Alexander shared this comment. Total Wine is widespread, but prices vary from store to store. It's strange. A lot of items have similar prices, but some vary wildly. For example, Oban Little Bay is $65 and $93 at the two Total Wines in Tennessee. Over the border, it can be had for $46 at Total Wine. I agree with the statement about Wine Searcher. I use it when I need to. And Leon responded to the suggestions with this comment. You poor souls concerning Scotch prices. Once more I realize we are truly blessed with the German, French, and Dutch prices for single malt Scotch over here. In the end, though, I wonder if it's such a good thing, but that's another discussion. If you'd like to have that discussion, download the free WhiskyCast community app from the Apple or Google app stores and join the conversation. You can also use the app to take our new interactive course on the craft and adventure of whiskey, too. Of course, we're also available on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on X, Threads, Facebook, and Instagram. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey, where they explore the frontiers of natural flavor one farm at a time to create unique Irish whiskies. Visit them on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. What's the most expensive bottle of whiskey ever sold? The Macallan 1926 Fine and Rare currently holds the world record. One of the 40 bottles known to be in existence sold for $1.9 million at Sotheby's in 2019. 14 bottles, including that one, carried the Fine and Rare label, while 12 had special labels created by artist Sir Peter Blake, and 12 more were labeled by Italian painter Valerio Adami. One was hand-painted by Irish artist Michael Dillon, and when it sold in 2018, it became the first whiskey to break the £1 million mark at auction. By the way, you can listen to my interview with Michael Dillon in episode 743 of WhiskyCast. It's in the archives at whiskycast.com. Now, one of the Adami labeled bottles is coming up for auction again. It'll go on the block at Sotheby's in London on November 18th. It is unique, though, in that it's the first to have gone through a unique reconditioning process at the distillery, during which the cork and capsule were replaced with identical duplicates, and new glue was applied to the corners of the label. What's more, a 1 milliliter sample was taken from the bottle to be chemically analyzed against another 1926 bottle in the Macallan archives to ensure its authenticity. Finally, of those 40 bottles, only 38 are accounted for. One is missing, the rarest of them all, an unlabeled 1926 Macallan. One of the Adami bottles is believed to have been destroyed in the 2011 Japanese earthquakes, and photographic evidence indicates that one was opened and consumed. That must have been an expensive tasting. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple or Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Find the new Dewar's 12-year-old and discover what all the awards are about. You can toast and thank me later. From Dewar's, the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.